Hi, friends. I think one of the roles of a lawyer in our society is to be a leader in times of crisis and to talk to people about the legal and constitutional implications of things that are done in the interest of managing crises and emergencies, and to make sure that we as a society stay on a constitutional track, that liberty is not unduly compromised or lost during a crisis. Now, the governor of Idaho has recently issued a stay-at-home order, Governor Brad Little, and I have relatives in Idaho that say that police are roaming the streets, patrolling, asking questions of anybody who's out of their home, and they're having massive surveillance and basically a cracking down on anybody who's out of their house without a reason. Obviously, we don't want this to continue indefinitely. It has massive implications for whether or not we are a free society or a free people. And I don't live in Idaho, I live in Utah. But if Idaho goes that way, Utah could be next. So I want to talk about the constitutional implications of what Governor Little has done. Now, going from his website, the first question is, does the governor have the authority to issue a stay-at-home order? It says, yes, the governor is commander of the militia under Article 4, Section 4, and supreme executive power is vested within the governor under Article 4, Section 5 of the Idaho Constitution. This authority is codified throughout Idaho law. Okay, you could almost believe reading that the governor is invested with supreme power, with unlimited power, which, of course, he's not. Now, if we move along, it says the authority to issue orders such as the stay-at-home order is found within Chapter 6, Title 46 of the Idaho Code. All right, now just to be really clear, let's turn to Section 46, Chapter 6 of the Idaho Code. The heading is Martial Law and Active Duty. Okay, so the governor has actually used power granted by Idaho statute to declare martial law in Idaho. Okay, there is no doubt that that's what he's done. He's calling it a stay-at-home order. It's martial law. It's military governance. He has assumed the powers of a dictator in a sense. Okay, you need to understand this very clearly because we're calling it, something a lot more mild than that. But it's dictatorship. It's saying I'm assuming emergency powers where people have to be, where I have to be able to act quickly without legislative approval and basically be a law unto myself. And the Idaho legislature has granted him that power within certain limits. And the limits are, the governor shall have power in the event of a state of extreme emergency to order into active service of the state the National Guard or any part thereof, and the organized militia or any part thereof, or both as he may deem proper. State of extreme emergency means A, the duly proclaimed existence of conditions of extreme peril to the safety of persons and property within the state or any part thereof caused by an enemy attack or threatened attack, or B, the duly proclaimed existence of conditions of extreme peril to the safety of persons and property within the state or any part thereof caused by such conditions as air pollution, fire, flood, storm, epidemic, riot, or earthquake, insurrection, breach of the peace, which conditions by reason of their magnitude are or are likely to be beyond the control of the services, personnel, equipment, and facilities of any county, any city, or any city and county. Now, if we unpack that a little bit, number one, it has to be a state of extreme peril. Now, I know the COVID-19 thing is serious. I'm not trying to say it isn't. Is it serious to the point that we would compare it to an imminent attack on the state by another country? Is it extreme peril comparable to a fire, flood, storm? Now it says epidemic, so COVID has been, it would qualify, I guess, under that language. But does it mean just any epidemic? Because it says which conditions by reason of their magnitude are or are likely to be beyond the control of the services, personnel, equipment, and facilities of any county, any city, or any city and county. Okay, now I have lived in Idaho during my childhood for a period of time. I know there's a lot of towns out there where, I mean, they're practically quarantined just by virtue of living in Moscow, Idaho, or Geneva, Idaho. These, Raymond, Idaho. There's these tiny little towns out there that are basically isolated on their own. Did the governor need to come down and quarantine people by force, by military force, to do that? Beyond this, okay, I don't want to declare this statute unconstitutional. I'm not trying to say that it is or isn't. I have questions about it. Because under the United States Constitution, for example, the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended, and you can imprison people without trial if Congress approves it. And it has to be, times of war and things like that. The last time it was actually done in America was during the Civil War. Now, you can also, argue that it should have been done when President Franklin Roosevelt interred the Japanese in relocation camps, which was a huge detriment to their civil liberties, and President Roosevelt justified what he did without a suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, without congressional approval. He did it because he said, well, we're in an extreme national emergency, and these Japanese Americans might really be more loyal to Japan than the United States. In historical perspective, in the rearview mirror, we look back at that and think, that was an atrocity. So I want us to think, because in times of crisis, oftentimes we're ready to just throw civil liberties out the window and say, no, we need a strong executive to just deal with things. All right, and I want you to be really careful, okay? I want you to be really careful not to just say, let's take all of the cherished beliefs that we have as Americans and throw them out the window because there's a national emergency. Because I'm going to suggest that the times, the moments when we as a country are most vulnerable to dictatorship is in times of extreme national crisis or emergency. How did Hitler rise to power? He rose to power out of the ashes of World War I when his country was humbled, and he came in promising to restore Germany's strength and to protect them. And we got one of the worst atrocities in history. We could look at what happened in France. We had a revolution against the king, and who did we get? We got Robespierre and the Reign of Terror, and we got Emperor Napoleon, who used moments of crises to consolidate power. Now, do I think Brad Little is a Robespierre or an Emperor Napoleon? No, I'm not saying that. I'm talking about what he has done in terms of historical precedent. And I want you all to ask the question of yourselves. Could Governor Brad Little not have convened the legislature and asked them to give him the power to do what he's done? Could there not have been a meeting of the people's elected representatives before he just declared martial law, told everybody to stay at home, and have police roaming the streets at all hours of the night enforcing his orders? And it's got some people up there scared. I mean, really, it legitimately does. And is this where we're heading in Utah? Is this where we're heading in other places around our country? 20 states now have stay-at-home orders. 20. Okay, that's 40% of the states in our country. And I don't know if all of them used the power to declare martial law that Governor Little did. But in moments of crisis and panic, we need to have cooler heads than this. We need to think about what we're doing for the long-term safety and security of our freedom. Because it's in moments of crisis when freedom is most vulnerable. When property rights go out the window, when freedom of movement goes out the window, when freedom of speech goes out the window. Okay? I'm standing before you today because I love the Constitution. I love the freedom that we have in this country. And I don't want us to be too ready to just sweep that aside. Many of the people that are pushing for curfews and stay-at-home orders and things like that are now furious with George Bush for ramming through the Patriot Act after 9/11 and using a moment of crisis to do that. And maybe rightly so. But think about this, the Patriot Act was at least passed by Congress. It was at least put before the people's elected representatives. And, you know, if you're going to diminish civil liberties, maybe you need to at least put it before the people's elected representatives and have a debate over it. You know, we're not in an age, we hope, where kings can just dissolve Parliament and do whatever they want. And so my belief is that this is a moment when Governor Little and any governor throughout the U.S. can go about this a different way than merely declaring a state of emergency and, you know, imposing dictatorial rule through martial law. And I want our governors to consider that. And Governor Herbert's a Facebook friend of mine. He's got family that are Facebook friends of mine. Talk to him. So far, I think he's tried to strike the right balance, and he's tried to get people to do the right thing about COVID-19 voluntarily without sending police and the National Guard out into the streets to enforce it. And I think people largely, out of a sense of civic duty and personal safety, have been abiding, by and large, by what he's asked, and I commend people for that. Understand, it's not the measures that I'm taking issue with. It's the way in which Governor Little has chosen to impose them with an iron fist. And I do have questions about the constitutionality of statutes that in advance, not even knowing what the emergency is going to be, that simply give the governor carte blanche power to do what he wants by declaring a state of emergency. Now, let me just give a little example. Conditions of extreme peril to the safety of persons. This is again from the Idaho statute. A state of emergency is conditions of extreme peril to the safety of persons and property within the state or any part thereof, caused by an enemy attack or threatened attack, or the duly proclaimed existence of conditions of extreme peril to the safety of persons and property within the state or any part thereof, caused by such conditions as air pollution is the first one. Now, every car on the street, you can argue, pollutes the air. Is it within the governor's power to declare martial law to stop people from driving? If we read this statute broadly enough, if he can do that, what can't he do? Air pollution, fire. So if one person's house is on fire and it threatens to spread, can the governor declare martial law over that? And if so, how long can that state of emergency last? Now, some people are suggesting that, or might suggest that that's, a fanciful kind of exercise. And I get that. But here's the thing. When you start giving a chief executive dictatorial kinds of powers and in advance of any emergency, saying, hey, if there happens to be an emergency, here, we're going to just hand you the keys of government and it's all yours. I think you need to be very, very careful that those powers are very clearly defined and the circumstances under which the governor can exercise them are very clearly defined. And I think giving him the power, for example, to declare a state of emergency for air pollution, okay, I get it. If there's volcanic ash all over the place in the air, I get it even if, there's a nuclear meltdown or something like that. But how far can you take that? What we still know about COVID-19 is that the chances that it's going to kill a vast number of people are still relatively mild. And I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't take it seriously and that our old people don't matter and all the rest of that. Of course, I care about all those things. But the question I want everybody to think about is, why couldn't Governor Little have summoned his legislature and done this in a constitutionally appropriate way without declaring a state of emergency and declaring martial law? Okay, and if we in Utah are faced with the same situation, I want our governor to go to the people's elected representatives. There's a fair point you could make in response to what I'm saying, suggesting that, if we convene the legislature, then they could all make each other sick and take the illness, the pandemic back to their families and whoever else they're in contact with. I think it's time in America where we have the technologies that we do for senators and representatives to be able, at least in crisis situations, to do their job remotely, to take votes remotely, to give speeches remotely. I mean, let's face it, on the House or the Senate floor, oftentimes you're seeing people speaking to an empty chamber. And they want their speech on the congressional record, but as far as we know, nobody's listening to it. And we could, and maybe there are people back in their offices in the House or Senate office buildings that are watching, but you wouldn't know that to watch it on C-SPAN. And we can do the same things through technology. Is it as good as being there and going to functions and gatherings with other congressmen and senators? No, of course not. But it's better than nothing. And it's better than just having a governor unilaterally declare that there's an emergency, therefore I'm taking over. Parliament's dissolved. In moments of crisis, as I've said throughout this video, we tend to look to the executive to take strong action and we allow the executive to cast aside our elected representatives and some of the most important and sacred protections of our Republican form of government. I'm making a plea for cooler heads to prevail. Let's not cast aside civil liberties and constitutional safeguards because we're in an emergency. Governor Little could have gone to the legislature and asked for the power to do what he has just declared himself to have the power to do because of a pre-existing authority and statute that I think is of questionable constitutional legitimacy. Our governor in Utah, Gary Herbert, who a man I admire and respect, so far has not gone that far. I hope he won't. If he feels the need for further restriction, I hope he'll go to the legislature and ask for the authority and have a robust and open debate and trust the people's elected representatives to realize the need for quick action and impose those measures only after a robust debate. I noticed that Clayton Williams, the former governor of Texas, is watching this post. Governor, get on the phone. Call your fellow governors. I know you're not a governor now, but I invite you to make a plea to the other governors in America to be calm in this crisis, to exercise decisive authority but not run over the checks and balances that we hold sacred in our republic. Sherry Hillsman's asking if the governor's declared martial law, and she says she can't find it anywhere. We went over this at the beginning of this recording, but for those who weren't here, I'll repeat what I said. In the stay-at-home order, which is how he styles it, it says, does the governor have authority to issue a stay-at-home order? And it indicates the authority to issue orders such as stay-at-home order is found within Chapter 6, Title 46 of the Idaho Code. The heading of that section is the governor's authority to declare martial law in cases of extreme emergency. So he's using the martial law authority to do what he did. And my argument is that rather than do that, he could have gone to the legislature and asked them to do it and signed it. And I think it would have had greater constitutional legitimacy. So, I thank you all for watching. I hope you'll give this serious thought. As I've said, in times of crisis, civil liberties tend to get cast aside. Constitutional rights tend to be disregarded in the name of addressing present exigencies and emergencies. We're better than that. And we can do better than that. Democracy, a Republican form of government, is inconvenient. I understand that. But when possible, we need to involve the people's elected representatives and not merely invoke emergency powers to assume dictatorial authority. So thank you all for listening. I hope you'll consider what I've said. Communicate with your elected officials. Let them know how you feel about this. And I hope this changes some of your thinking on this. And just in case anyone has any doubt, I'm not suggesting that people go out and do reckless things and, congregate in groups and spread the virus. And, I'm not suggesting that kind of protest. I'm not even saying that the measures are wrong. I'm saying that the method he went about this is a bad precedent. And thank you again for listening. I hope you'll take this to heart. Talk to you soon.